Our patchwork pieces are prepped and ready to go and are ready to make our basket. In this lesson, I'll show you how to add stability with the right interfacing. Then we'll sew everything together. And finally, I'll show you how to add shape to the basket and add some handles. Here I have two pieces, my two patchwork pieces that I sewed earlier, and one will be the interior of the basket and one will be the exterior. But we'll need to add some extra stabilizers to those so the basket stands up nicely. Here are some sample stabilizers that I have. This one is called by Annie Stabilizer. It's a flexible foam stabilizer. It has a thin piece of fabric on both sides. It's really nice. I love it because it makes a really nice finish, and I use it for almost all my baskets. Pellon makes a similar product, and the good thing about that is it's fusible. So if you love using fusible interfacing, not sew-in, Pellon makes it in sew-in, one-sided fusible, and two-sided fusible. It's kind of my second choice here because if you use the fusible and when you turn your basket right side out, you have to manipulate it a lot, and sometimes you get wrinkles on the fabric that won't come out. You can iron them and they come out a little bit, but not all the way. But if you love fusibles, this one is a good choice. This is the basket that we're going to make today, and I use the by Annie stabilizer in this. And it looks great. It stands up nice, sturdy sides. It's really awesome. Another option that you have is Fusible Fleece. Fusible Fleece is a little bit thinner, but it's widely available, so it's easier to find. This interfacing does not make wrinkles in your fabric when you turn your fabric right side out, so it's a great choice, and it's also a little bit less expensive. Here's a basket that I made with the Fusible Fleece. You can see that it's not quite as sturdy, but it's still a nice basket. It's still really cute, so that's one more option you have. Now these baskets were both made with 5-inch charm squares. If you're making a small basket, say with 2.5 inch or 3-inch squares, you could also use, this is called Shape Flex from Pellon, and this is a woven fusible interfacing. I love it for all kinds of applications, and I'm going to use it a lot later, but keep this in mind if you're making a tiny basket and you don't want it to be really sturdy. You can use this. So for this basket, the interfacing that I've chosen is the by Annie's Flex Foam, and this is going to make a really great basket, so we'll do that next. So the first thing we want to do is add the all-over stabilizer for the basket, and this will go on the basket interior piece. What I did first, I'm using this flexible foam interfacing. So first I laid my patchwork piece on top of the flexible foam and I just cut all the way around it to get a nice square piece the same size. Next, we need to cut out the corners so that when we fold the sides of the basket out, we don't have these extra sides, extra interfacing here at the corners that makes it hard to sew. So I will take my little ruler and I'll just measure the size of this. And it is 4 3/4 inches. You might remember that from sewing it. So the corners that I cut out here are 4 3/4 inches. I've cut 3 of them already. And I'm just gonna cut the last one right here. It's super easy. Just measure with a little ruler and then cut it with a rotary blade. It's just fine if you cut into your foam a little bit. That's not gonna show at all. Now that we have the 4 corners cut out, there's one more step I like to do to make the opening easier to close. This looks like a plus sign, and I'm going to trim 3/8 of an inch off one of the little arms. That's because we're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance later to sew the basket pieces together. I'm just going to eyeball this. I use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the time, and it doesn't have to be exact. There we go. Now it's ready. Here's my interior basket piece, and I can either fuse or sew this to the interior to the wrong side, just like this. I'm going to sew it. If you're going to fuse it, you could fuse it now, but I'm going to use a basting stitch, which is a longer stitch. Sometimes you can just use the longest stitch length that your sewing machine makes, or something a little bit shorter. And first I will stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edges on these 3 sides. And then over here, where my basting stitches are going to show, I'm going to stitch way down here. It's just to hold this little arm in place, and I'm going to sew down low so that I remember when I see those basting stitches that I need to take them out. The other basting stitches will probably be hidden, and we probably won't have to take them out, but these will definitely have to take out. And before I take this over to my sewing machine, I'm going to pin the interfacing in place. Turn it over. You don't need to pin a lot. Just going to place 2 pins on each side, all the way around. And over here, where it's shorter, just place my pins over here. Now I'm ready to take this over to my machine and do the basting stitch. Now that I've finished sewing the all-over stabilizer to the interior portion of my basket, I'm going to sew some extra sturdy interfacing just to the bottom, the middle of the exterior piece of the basket. You can see here I cut a square, and it's the same size as these 4 squares right here. Now you might think that these are going to be a 9-inch square because our squares finish at 4.5 inches. But when I measured them, I found that they weren't quite 9 inches, they were more like 8 7/8 inches. And it's always a good idea to check and make sure. So then I cut my piece of extra sturdy interfacing that same size, 8 7/8 inch square. Now this is a Pellon product. This is called Peltex. There are other products available, and I'm using the sew-in variety because when I tried this basket on the fusible variety, when I turned the basket right side out, it created wrinkles on the bottom of my basket that I couldn't iron out. So I like to use the sew-in variety better. But we'll need to sew it in to the wrong side. So I'm just going to center it here, using the seam lines here that I see as a guide to center it. And first I will pin it from the wrong side. You really only need to pin the 4 corners. So I've pinned it from the wrong side, and then I'll turn it over, and I'm going to pin it again from the right side, because I'll sew it from the right side. So I don't accidentally hit a pin, I'm going to take the pins out from the wrong side. Okay, now I'm going to sew around and top stitch this, because somebody might look on the bottom of my basket, and I still want it to look nice. So I'll top stitch using a regular stitch length of about 3 millimeters. And I'll use the edge of my presser foot as a guide, which is about 1/4 inch. This is pretty easy, just sew around. And when you get back to the place where you started, just a little back stitch neatly. Now you can check to make sure that the interfacing caught all the way around. This is the inside of the basket, so even if your piece of interfacing shifted a little bit or it didn't catch on all sides, that's okay, it won't show. Now that I have my stabilizer sewn to my basket interior and exterior pieces, we're ready to sew them together. So just place them right sides together, and the piece that I have on top is the piece with the Peltex, which will be the exterior of the basket. And that's just because I can see better without interfacing all around these edges. So I want this part right here to be the opening after I sew all the way around, and that's because I have the shorter interfacing here on the bottom. So I'm going to line this up, and here's a little trick that I use to remind myself that this is an opening so I don't sew all the way, close it, and then have to unpick it, which happens to me all the time if I don't remind myself. So I'm going to put 2 pins right here, which will be where I start sewing, and then I'm going to place 2 pins right here, which will be where I stop sewing and backstitch. Okay, it's just a reminder to myself so that I leave this part open and I don't sew all the way across. And then I'll just go around with my pins. I like to make sure that my seams are matched up so that they look good from the outside of the basket into the inside. Okay, now I'm back here ready to sew all the way around, starting right here where my double pins are. Just make sure that looks good. Now, we're going to sew this with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And back to a regular stitch length. Make sure we're at about 2, maybe a little bigger than 2 millimeters, just so that it's nice and secure. And I'll back stitch here because this is going to take lots of tugging when I pull the bag right side out. And I want to make sure this doesn't come undone. Then I'll sew down to the corner. Okay, now I'm sewing back to my double pins right here, and that's my reminder that I'll stop and back stitch here and leave this opening for turning. Awesome. Now here's another thing that I like to do to make this opening look nicer when it's turned right side out. I'm going to press it before I turn it right side out. I'll just turn it back the same amount that the seam allowance is, which is 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to press it that much now. I do this because it's easier to press this open now than once it's turned right side out. And I'll do it from both sides. Here, see, now I'm glad that I cut this extra 3/8 of an inch off my interfacing because the seam just kind of wraps around it. The seam allowance wraps around it like this, and I don't have to turn the interfacing also. There we go. Now I'm going to cut off all the corners so they turn nicely too. If you don't cut your corners off like this, then your corners are all bunched and they don't make sharp points. But you do want to be careful that you don't cut the threads here. If you do cut the threads, it's okay, but you'll have to go back to your sewing machine and sew around that corner one more time so there's no hole right there at the corner. So now that it's all pressed right here at the opening and we have the corners cut, I'm going to turn it right side out. It's kind of bulky. I'm just going to grab it, pull it through. I love these blues and greens. Now, to turn my corners out all the way, I'll use a chopstick. There are other turning tools you can buy, but I still use the chopstick that I learned to sew with. So I'm pushing the corners out here. I don't want to push too hard, or I can still poke a hole through the fabric, but I'm just pushing each one out until it looks as sharp as I think I can get it. A nice helping. I can also use the chopstick to help me at this point kind of push out the edges. Make sure everything turns out perfectly if I run it along the edges here. Now, if you do push your chopstick too hard and you poke a hole through the corner of your project, it's all right. You can fix it. Just turn it inside out one more time, smooth it all out, sew that corner again, and then start over, turn it, and press it again. Everything can be fixed. That's why I love sewing. So, with this all turned now, I'm going to press it one more time, just to get nice edges. Right here, our opening edges are already pressed. I can just make sure that they look good. And I can even put a pin here to hold it in place. Top stitching. And once everything's all pressed nice, then we're ready for top stitching. So, to top stitch this and close the opening at the same time, I'm going to start sewing right here, top stitch all the way around the edges, makes a nice crisp edge on the corner, and it closes up the opening. So, what I'll do is I'll turn my stitch length up just a little bit, up to almost 3 again, my top stitching length, and I'll start right here. Now keep in mind, like I said before, if I was sewing this at home, I would be using a non-contrast dressing thread, like a nice taupe thread or something that blended well, a neutral thread. But just for everybody to see, I'm using navy blue contrasting thread today. So this top stitching is 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Just going slow, especially on the opening here, because I want this part to look like it never happened, like there was never an opening here. So I'll just go slowly over this part. Now I'll just continue and I'll top stitch down to here, pivot around the corner, and all the way around the piece. I'm almost back to the place where I started. There I'm going to do a neat back stitch, and I'll be done top stitching. Just cut my threads. Now, that looks kind of messy there. I don't really like it, but if I was using a neutral thread that blended in, it wouldn't show, and I'll have a place to cover that up later anyway. So we're almost done. Next, we're going to sew some score lines or fold lines here and here and here and here. Because later, when we turn the basket and shape it, we're going to fold the basket along those lines, and having the fold lines sewn will make it easy, kind of like when you score a card before you fold it. Now, just so you know, when you sew the lines on the exterior side, which is the same side that we sewed the Peltex onto, they're not going to match up and be in the exact same place over here on the interior, but that's okay, because on the exterior of the basket is really the only place where they're going to show. And on the interior, they might not be exactly in the ditch on this side, but that's okay, because we'll fold it up and they'll disappear into the crease and you won't even see it. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to stitch in the ditch as closely as I can. And if I was using neutral thread, it would totally blend in and disappear. And just go down here, and here, and here, and here. So I'll do that now. I am going to backstitch, but just a couple stitches neatly. So I'm stitching in the ditch here. And because earlier we pressed all the seams to one side, you can see that there's a higher edge and a lower edge on all my seams. So I'm keeping my stitches on the lower side and as close to in the ditch as possible. Okay, I'm almost done here, so I'm going to backstitch very neatly and cut my threads. Okay, now I'll finish with the other 3 fold lines. So I already sewed along all of my fold lines. I'm going to go ahead and trim my threads, and then this basket is ready to be shaped. now we're ready to form the corners of our baskets. Now I'm working from the inside of my basket, and you can see here that I already took out the basting stitches that were next to my opening. Those can be gone now, we don't need them anymore. And you can also see here how my stitch in the ditch did not line up on the inside, the same as the outside. And that's okay. First of all, in a real basket, I would be using matching thread that didn't stand out quite so bad. And also, when I fold this up to make the basket, those stitches are just going to disappear in the crease and we won't even see them. So this is the corner that I'll make first. I'm just going to fold the basket diagonally. And then I'll place a few pins. I want to make sure that this is lined up nicely and that this seam matches the seam on the back and that it's the same height right here because this is one side and this is the other side. So once I have it all lined up the way that I like it, I'll place just a couple of pins. And now I'm going to stitch right on top of my previous stitching right down this line as far as I can go and then backstitch. And I'll backstitch at the top too. Of course, pull your pins out as you go. And I'm just stitching all the way down to the corner here. And a neat little backstitch. And that's done. There's one corner. Beautiful. So go ahead and fold and stitch all 4 corners in the basket. Then we get to add some pretty handles. Okay, now we've finished all the corners on our basket. What we'll do next is we'll sew the handles into the flaps and fold them against the basket like this, and it'll be really cute. So let's make those handles. For each handle, cut a rectangle of fabric and cut it 4 times as wide as you want your handle to be. For this size basket, I love a 1.5 inch handle, so I cut this 6 inches wide. And then the length of the handle is the length of the bottom of the basket plus 1 inch. So this basket is 9 inches along the bottom, and this is 10 inches long. We're going to fold this bias tape style and press it. Fold it in half, press a nice crease here along the bottom, then open, fold the edges to the inside, press, fold one more time, and press. So this bias tape style handle. You can also see that I have shape flex interfacing on the back of my fabric. It makes it a little bit sturdier and really nice, although not puffy. And this is the SX linen that I like. It goes well with almost all patchwork. So these are just my choices for the handle. And you can see here for the finished handles, after I folded and pressed it, then I top stitched 1/8 of an inch from either edge. And they look nice and flat and pretty. So now let's put them in. So decide which way you want your flaps to go. I want these flaps to turn in like this. So I'll take a handle and insert it about 1/2 inch into the flap. Now, you can pin this if you like, but I think it's easier just to go ahead and hold it and stitch it. And I'm going to baste it in here. A long stitch length for basting. Kind of flatten my basket. The handle goes about halfway in the flap from here to here. Just imagine it about halfway. And then baste right on top of your top stitching that you have right here. Nice and easy. Perfect. Now since my flaps are going to turn like this, I want this one to go right in the other side. I could pin it, but I'm not going to stress about that. I'm just going to flatten my basket a little bit. Get the handle under there. It's about halfway down in the middle of the flap. And I'll just baste across again. Baste across right on my top stitching. Easy. Basket's almost done. Okay, so I'm folding these in, and here I do like to pin, because here, just want to make sure that this flap reaches as close to the center line as I can make it comfortably. I'll pin it, and I'll do the same over here, just to make them match and look good together, just like that. Now for this part, you can turn your basket inside out, and that helps with just making it easier to stitch. Now, I'm going to stitch from about over here. You don't have to go all the way in the corner. There's a lot of bulk here in the corner, and you could break your needle. So I'm going to start about right here, and I'm going to just sew across to this point, and then backstitch again. Now, if you're not using a heavy-duty needle, this is a good time to put one in, because you're sewing through a lot of layers right here. I'm using a 9014 needle, a titanium 9014, and so I'm comfortable going across this. You might want to go up to a 116 needle if your sewing machine struggles when you're sewing through all these layers. And so right on top, I'm going to go back down to my top stitching stitch length of about 3, and I'm going to sew right on top of the other top stitching and basting. Backstitching. And all the way down to the corner. Backstitching again. Okay, that side is done. I'll take out the pin, and now I'll do the exact same thing on the other side of the handle, except I'll start here at the point. I'll stitch across on top of my other sewing, and then about right here before I get to the corner, just backstitch again. And then across the handle, right on top of your previous stitching. And that's totally cute. All you have to do to finish the basket is sew one more handle on the other side. So here's our finished basket with sturdy sides and cute handles. For your homework, go ahead and finish assembling your basket and add the handles. In the next lesson, we'll trim up the 2x6 patchwork pieces and make pleats until they're the right shape for a tote bag.